On behalf of Dr. R.C. Davis, Undiano, and all my colleagues at WLT, I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. Our overall focus this week is on the intersections of literature and photography, which is the cover feature of our March issue. If you haven't seen this yet or gotten a hold of it, you'd probably want to grab one this week because it's selling out pretty fast, and a lot of people have told us it's one of the most beautiful and powerful issues we've done, so I hope you can take a look at it when you stop out at the front table. So with this idea of literature and photography, the festival itself has been built around the theme of women's empowerment and using art to promote social justice. This evening's program features a panel on human trafficking and the Oklahoma premiere of the film Girl Rising, which is sponsored by 10 by 10, a social action campaign that uses the power of storytelling and the leverage of strategic partnerships to deliver a single message: educating girls in developing nations will change the world. On the back of your programs is a website that links to more information about the 10 by 10 project. This year's Puterbaugh is the 26th festival in the series, dating back to 1968, and it marks one of the most ambitious programs we've ever put together, thanks to our campus partners, the College of International Studies, our co-sponsor for tonight's event, the Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art, Women's and Gender Studies, African and African American Studies, and the School of Art and Art History. Without their generous support and encouragement, tonight's event and several of our other public events throughout the week simply would not have been possible. I'd also like to quickly thank our sponsors for this year's festival, the Puterbaugh Foundation, and especially Ms. Carrie Jane Loftus, the niece of J.G. Puterbaugh, who is with us this evening. Carrie Jane, would you please stand so we could recognize you? I'd also like to acknowledge the generous funding we received from the Oklahoma Humanities Council and the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, OU's Vice President for Research, the Oklahoma Arts Council, and the Focus Distinguished Lecture Series, as well as Republic Bank and Trust. Without further delay, I'd like to welcome Dr. Suzette Grillot, the Dean of OU's College of International Studies, to offer a few words of welcome by way of introducing our panel. Professor Grillot serves as Vice Provost of International Programs and is the William J. Crow Jr. Chair in Geopolitics here at OU. She teaches a course that covers all aspects of trafficking, including weapons, drugs, humans, animals, organs, art, and antiquities. Her most recent book is Understanding the Global Community, co-edited with Zach Massetti, which was just published by the University of Oklahoma Press. Again, thank you for coming, and please welcome Dr. Suzette Grillot.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. It is really my pleasure to introduce to you the moderator for this evening and to welcome you to this very important panel on human trafficking. It is, of course, unfortunate and sad that we have to have a discussion about human trafficking. It would really be great if humans weren't trafficked, if nothing was actually trafficked, if there was no such thing as illicit trafficking. So it's sad and difficult to acknowledge such unspeakable things that happen to our fellow humans, but it is absolutely necessary to have such a panel to raise the veil of silence about this rather invisible issue and energize ourselves about what we can do about the subject. As with so many important discussions that happen on this campus, it is often driven by students and student interests and student demand. The class that I teach on illicit trafficking that focuses all aspects of trafficking issues, as Daniel Simon was telling you, was really in response to student requests for such a class to learn more about the subject of human trafficking, weapons trafficking, drug trafficking. And so it's really been inspiring to know that it's the commitment of students and the passion of students that really brings us together on this issue. And this panel tonight is really no exception. This event was particularly driven by students, and you obviously are going to be hearing from a number of students on the panel. I'd also like to recognize and thank Melissa Weiss for her involvement in organizing this panel. I think it was her idea from early on to focus on this, so thank you, Melissa, for your your efforts. And then, of course, I would just really like to thank Daniel, Simon, and R.C. Davis, and everyone at World Literature Today for their wonderful events that they put on of this sort, all of the things that they do to bring knowledge about the rest of the world to this campus. And it's such a delight and an honor for me to collaborate with them, and I look forward to future collaborations every year. So thank you all. So with that, I'd like to introduce your moderator for this evening's panel discussion, and I believe she will be introducing your panelists. Lucy Mahaffey has been combating human trafficking since she was 12 years old. Now she's a freshman at the University of Oklahoma and is double majoring in international and area studies in anthropology and also minoring in Spanish. Over the past 6 years, she's founded and spearheaded a program called Break the Chains. It's a Norman community-wide awareness event on global and local human trafficking. She has spoken at the Oklahoma County Bar Association on Oklahoma human trafficking, has advised and co-collaborated on the UCO production of Voiced, the real story of prostituted women. She recently received, and this is very exciting, the Davis Project for Peace grant to combat child sex trafficking in Oklahoma by educating middle school students and at youth camps about the issues of human trafficking, sex trafficking, and how we can get involved, how middle schoolers and youth camps can get involved. She will be working on this project throughout the summer and next semester.
A dear friend of mine. He serves as the Director of Texas Operations and General Counsel for Love 146, wonderful organization, very inspiring and hopeful. And he's actually spent time right after college in New York City working in the areas of community mobilization and social justice. It was in this capacity that he first traveled to the Philippines with Love 146, and in 2009 to attend the opening of the Round Home. His scholarly publications include an examination of human trafficking legislation in the United States and an analysis of the FBI's interrogation policy. And he's also an inspiration to me, personally. There's also John Putnam, who is actually a freshman here at OU. He is the Brothers Under Christ Service Chair, a member of the Big Event Operations Staff, and a member of Freedom Movement Oklahoma. And this organization, Freedom Movement Oklahoma, is a Christian-based student organization focusing on raising awareness of modern-day slavery on campus. And their mission is to unite a generation to demand freedom for the least of these, those in need that Christ calls us to serve. Also, we have Anna, and I don't want to butcher your last name, Anna, but Anna's a very dear friend of mine, and she is, among many, many things, her passions are human rights, gender, politics, and writing. She's getting many different degrees, and she hopes to bring her passion and dedication to human rights to her future career in international law through institutions such as the United Nations. On campus, she is the president of both OU Amnesty International and OU's chapter of Oklahomans Against Trafficking Humans, the state coalition that combats trafficking. Finally, we have Jessica, who's a junior at Norman North. She's percussionist in band, and she's a vice president of Helping Oklahomans Prevent Exploitation, which is dedicated to raising awareness about human trafficking. It's a very good movement in the high school, I appreciate her dedication to this topic, especially for someone so young. And then, last but certainly not least, we have my very, very dear friend, Kira Samantha, who is an inspiration to me every single day I'm alive. She's been involved in mentorships and in videos and blogs and writing things and in speaking and presenting in awareness events. And she'll introduce herself, I'm sure, later in the program, but you'll hear a lot about her. So, to jump us off, I have a question for every single person in the room. How many of you have seen or heard of the movie Taken? Anyone? Does anyone know what that is? Yeah, Liam Neeson's pretty cool, right? Well, unfortunately, maybe, the issue that's discussed in Taken is actually a lot more prominent than most people know. It's called human trafficking. It's also known as modern-day slavery, and it has many different types. Child brides, organ trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking. There are many different types, servitude. But it's very prominent in today's society. In fact, it is the second largest criminal industry in the world, and global experts actually believe it will top the first global industry and become the first global criminal industry in the world. So people think it will actually top drug trafficking in the next 5 years. It's kind of outstanding in a very bad way. But globally, numbers aren't. No, it's very hard to do research on this topic, but numbers range from 27 million to 30-something million people that are involved in this industry today. Kind of the general consensus is 27 million. That's a very, very large amount of people. In Oklahoma specifically, not to tread on anyone else's discussion, but in Oklahoma and America specifically, people estimate that there's anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 children being trafficked in America annually. A common misconception is that to be trafficked, you actually have to leave your own home. You don't. You can be trafficked from within your own home, and you don't have to cross national borders to be trafficked. So, that being said, we're going to go much deeper into the whole topic, starting with Christian Rose. So I'd like to introduce him again. Christian.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Lucy. I'm terrible at multitasking. I'm going to try to turn on my computer and talk at the same time. We'll see how that goes. So as Lucy said, I serve currently as the Director of Texas Operations, and as soon as I pass the bar this summer, I'll also serve as General Counsel for Love 146, international human rights organization based out of New Haven, Connecticut. It was in 2009 that I first traveled to Southeast Asia with 146. I was at that time serving on staff at a church in New York City. Went over there to see some of their programs, both in prevention and survivor care. When I got over there, I saw horrific things that I had read about and seen documentaries about, but there was something about seeing it in person that was utterly life-changing. And so from that point on, I recognized that this issue was going to move from being a part of my career to being a center point of my career. And so came back to law school and moving forward in that way. I think just as an apt introduction to the issue, and particularly to child trafficking internationally, which is what 146 focuses on, I just want to show you this quick video.
are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Love 146 works toward the abolition of child sex slavery and exploitation through prevention and aftercare. Love 146 protects children across Asia, the US, and Europe by developing and sustaining targeted prevention projects in high-risk communities. Love 146 defends the rights of the vulnerable through advocacy, prevention, and effective action. Love 146 restores hope to survivors through holistic aftercare and training caregivers. The Love 146 Round Home provides therapy, a sense of family, and a space to thrive. Love 146 empowers survivors through education and viable employment opportunities, equipping them to transition back into communities.
So certainly, it's not just children who are trafficked. Adults are trafficked as well. And just, I don't know how familiar everybody is with the issue of trafficking. So just by way of background, in the U.S. in the year 2000, there was a seminal bill that was passed in Congress called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And essentially what that says is that human trafficking is defined as the commercial exploitation of people where the elements of force, fraud, or coercion are present. And so human trafficking is just the buying and selling of vulnerable people. And as has been pointed out, it's prolific. There's in the upwards of 27 or 30 million people being victimized, more people being trafficked and enslaved today than during the entirety of the transatlantic slave trade. And so when you look at the $32 billion of revenue that's generated annually by human trafficking, you recognize that this is not a small niche issue. This is a major global force. And so one thing I want us to walk away with tonight is the realization that to combat a $32 billion problem, a little bit of goodwill and symposiums, while that's a perfect first step in engagement, it's not going to be sufficient to end this thing. And I hope that you'll leave tonight with a passion to be a part of ending this. I want to underscore the reality that this is an economic issue. I mean, certainly there are profound spiritual and moral elements to this, but at the end of the day, people traffic people because it's immensely profitable. And so when you look at the profit ratios attending human trafficking, you see that it's actually more profitable to traffic people than it is any other commodity, right? And you think about, say, a kilo of heroin, and you can sell that one time. You get a person, and you can sell that person over and over and over and over. And so when you just think about the economics, you recognize that as a business decision, totally divorced of morality, this makes sense. And so you look at the profit ratios of human trafficking and recognize that the ratios are higher for human trafficking than for Microsoft, Google, Apple, more profitable, right? So we have to understand that fact before we're going to be able to develop effective policy to combat the issue. There's a lot of numbers we could talk about, and to try to talk about global trafficking is obviously a big issue. It happens in every nation around the world and every socioeconomic strata. So it's not just the poor and vulnerable, although that's the predominant pool of victims, but it happens even to U.S. Teenagers who live in wealthy neighborhoods. But I just wanted to share one story with you just to underscore the complexity of this issue. When I went to Cambodia back in 2009, I went to a little village called Svay Pak. And if any of you watched, there was a Dateline special back around 2005 where IJM, Gary Haugen went in and they did this undercover raid in this village where there was rampant child sex trafficking happening. And the Cambodian government was very reluctant to participate and collaborate in that, and they sort of got their hand forced because IJM said, we're going to show it on national television, so you might want to act like you're helping us, right? So they go in and do this, they arrest all these traffickers, these kids are freed, and everyone thinks, that is a great result, right? This is perfect, right? We're exposing traffickers, we're helping survivors, justice is happening. Well, let me tell you what happened. So 3 years later when I was there, this is what's happened in Svay Pak. Trafficking still exists there, but it's gone deeper underground. So what's happening now is that there are sex tourists going to sit back with screenshots from that Dateline episode and saying, this child I saw on the program, I want this child. The traffickers who were adults have now gotten younger, and so the two most prolific pimps in that village were 11 and 12 years old, and I met them. And so just to recognize that the results and the responses are incredibly multi-layered and complex. That's true in Cambodia, and it's true in the United States. And so tonight you're going to hear a lot about some different areas of trafficking, but I just want you to know a couple of things to walk away with, recognizing that from a policy standpoint, this is an economic issue. We have to have an economic response. It's a moral and spiritual issue, and as a independent personal advocate, that's got to be a part of our motivation in responding. And then third, just to remember that this is incredibly complex, and so simple knee-jerk reactions, the desire to go bust down a door and pull out a victim and serve and help, that feels right in the beginning, and ultimately it's not a smart, well-thought-through policy. And so as we engage with our minds, just keep those things in mind. So thanks so much. I appreciate being here.
I think to start, it's really easy to talk about an issue that is halfway across the world. It's not as easy to talk about an issue that's not just here in America, but that's in Texas and Oklahoma, where all of us are from, literally just like miles away down the street. So I kind of wanted to talk about just what trafficking looks like in America, what it looks like in Oklahoma, and also some things that you can do about it here. So I'm going to start with the End It movement, just because if you've seen any red X's anywhere, people with red X's on their hand, the big red X on the South Oval, that was actually Freedom Movement trying to get this logo out. End It movement is a group of nonprofits that banded together, and they said, like, we need a symbol, like the pink ribbon is for breast cancer. So we're trying to get this red X out there. So I just want you to know, like, whenever you see this, this is about human trafficking, and this is about getting, like, the message out there. And whenever you see this, tell people about that, about it and the issue, because you're going to be informed after tonight. As we talked about, there's at least 100,000 children in sex trafficking in the United States. That's kind of the low end of the estimate. And if you think about it, that's just children in sex trafficking, so you add forced labor and adults into that equation, and the number gets much higher, and that's really sad. So I'm going to talk about a few different issues that you might not think about them being related to trafficking, but they are, and kind of who's at risk of being trafficked. So the fact that there are nearly 1,800 immigrants that are trafficked into the country each year, that's really sad. And how that works is, people will be trafficked from a trafficker into the country. Also, there will be people that will come to the country hoping to make a better life for themselves, for their family. They'll get picked up. They'll be sent to farms where they're told, oh, you can get a really good job, and instead they're forced to work. And they're told, you have to pay off the car trip to this farm. So they're told that you have to pay that off, and then they're given this ridiculous amount of work that they have to do, very little pay, and it's nearly impossible to pay that off quickly, and they don't actually end up making a better life for themselves. So that's one way it kind of works. But if you just think about how many illegal immigrants we have in this country, for every person that we have that's undocumented that we don't know about, that's somebody that could be potentially being trafficked. Because we don't know that they exist. We do, but we don't know where they are, who they are. We have no control over that. So I'm going to talk about the John Pickle Company for a second. The John Pickle Company basically went to India, and they coerced, told some people hey, you can come over and work for us, and we're going to give you really good pay, and we're going to help you get started in America, and you can live the American dream. Well, they got there, and they were basically told, or they were basically forced to work in a factory for very little pay. They had these terrible dormitories that you're seeing right now, and they had armed guards outside their dormitories. And the company said, well, they were free to go whenever they wanted, but they had armed guards outside. And this is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This was about 10 years ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It went to court. The John Pickle Company lost, but the workers have never been paid for that. like from the court case. So that's something that literally happened in Oklahoma. I'm now going to kind of move a little bit more towards sex trafficking. So this is just, again, it's showing the 100,000 number of children that are in domestic sex trafficking, but it's also talking about the foster care system. And essentially, foster kids are more at risk for sex trafficking than, just like, somebody with two parents that live, a more typical life. The foster care, there are some numbers that say it's pretty high, like maybe up to 70%, but we don't know. What we do know is that foster care is one of the places where traffickers get victims. So a lot of it's illegal immigrants, a lot of it's foster care kids. Also, any women that are abused, any girls that are abused physically or sexually as children are more likely to be trafficked. That's another reoccurring sign that we see, is that a lot of people have been abused before they were trafficked. Even girls without an education, or people without an education, really, because it is a male issue too, like we talked about, but they're more likely to be trafficked as well. And you'll probably see a little bit more about that in the documentary that we're going to show tonight. It looks really good. This is actually a picture from the 10 by 10 organization. So that's really, it kind of is a feminist issue, or really is a feminist issue, because women that have an education are much less likely to be sex trafficked. Anybody that has an education that's not in poverty is much less likely to be trafficked. And so how does sex trafficking work in the United States, or in Oklahoma more specifically? So Houston, Texas is the #1 city in the nation for child sex trafficking. Atlanta, Georgia, and Las Vegas, Nevada follow quickly after. And if you think about where Oklahoma is located, we're located pretty much in the center of all those cities, pretty much in the center of the nation. And so what happens is people literally will be taken through truck stops. They'll be put in trucks and they'll be trafficked through truck stops. They'll be sold at truck stops. And because we have I-35 running right through Oklahoma City, that's made Oklahoma City a hub for sex trafficking. So we actually have a lot of it in Oklahoma. It's not an issue that is necessarily in India or in Africa. It's an issue that's also right here. So I wanted to give you a face. This is Karina Saunders. She was found behind a grocery store in October of 2011. And I'm not going to give you the details. The details would horrify many of you beyond what you might want to hear even for this issue at this panel. But if you want to look it up, it's something to look up. But they actually had arrested 2 people and let them go recently, and there's now like a $10,000 reward for information about it. But essentially, Karina Saunders was a girl that was in trafficking, and they believe that she was killed to threaten other girls, to show like, this is what happens if you disobey us. And that's a lot of how it works. What happens is it's not usually people that get kidnapped. It's usually more often, traffickers will befriend somebody who is who has common signs like young people that are kind of naive, that don't have like strong family ties, and poverty, girls in the foster care system, or like illegal immigrants, like all those factors. Traffickers target those people, and they usually befriend them and then coerce them into sex trafficking. Like they'll say like, oh, you want to go on a date or something like that, and they'll coerce them into sex trafficking without their knowledge. And then they'll have these fear tactics. They'll scare them. They'll say like, we know like where your family is, or this is what's going to happen to you. And they'll do something like what they did to Karina Saunders. So that's really a lot of how it kind of works in Oklahoma. So I kind of want to just give y'all some things that y'all can do. Because really every single person in this room has the power to influence trafficking, or influence the issue, and try to reduce trafficking. And one thing you can do is, think about the products that you make, the companies that you support when you buy products. As Christian said, this is an economic issue. There's a demand for trafficking because it supplies cheap labor. Because we get an extra like 20 cents off a candy bar from Hershey's, there's trafficking. Because we get like an extra like $3 or $4 off our t-shirts at Walmart, there's trafficking. These are some companies that don't have the best records of just keeping up with or monitoring their products. So there's a good app, Free to Work, that you can look up on if you have an iPhone, but you can like research it really anywhere, just products that are not good or companies that aren't good. Also, this is a company that I want to throw out. It's an awesome chocolate company, and since chocolate is cocoa is heavily produced by trafficking, this company, the fact that they don't use slave labor is really cool, and it's just one company that I think that I really wanted to like throw out there for y'all that y'all can look up and find out more about. Also, legally, think about laws like right now in Oklahoma there's a law to get rid of prostitution off victims' records, which is really going to help victims get jobs. There are national laws. The Violence Against Women's Act helps reduce domestic violence, which helps reduce trafficking, as well as the TVPRA. I think I just butchered that acronym, but it was a national law that recently helps them research trafficking, and also essentially has basically said like victims are victims, like prostitutes are victims of trafficking, and that's something that we haven't done with our prostitution laws. And I would just say, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again that you did not know.
To say it. Thank you so much for having me, and I am so excited to be here today to talk about something I am extremely passionate about, and it's a very largely overlooked side of human trafficking. So when the issue of human trafficking comes up in discussion, conversation, the news, panels like this, some pretty stereotypical imagery usually comes up. So basically an international young woman who has been taken across borders to be sexually exploited, or the discussion could revolve around a brothel that exploits dozens of women and children. And in these stories, men usually occupy the role of the bad guy. So rarely do we ever hear men in the place of the victim or the survivor. And today I am going to be talking about male victims of human trafficking and sort of caution you to be careful to take these discussions that only center on women as all-encompassing pictures of what human trafficking is and who can be a victim of it. So according to many available and widely cited databases and statistics, women take up the majority of human trafficking victims. And a lot of them even suggest that up to like 80 to 90% of all trafficking victims in the United States are women. And these same databases also suggest that women take up most of sex trafficking victims, whereas men take up most of labor trafficking victims. And this has created this dichotomy between women being part of sex trafficking, men being part of labor trafficking. So the interesting part here is actually that these statistics really vary, and a very big pool of evidence exists that actually say that men might take up a bigger number of victims than we think. So there's a statistic that says that just alone in England, about 41% of trafficking victims are men. And actually in 2009 from the State Department, we had a statistic that said that that victims in the United States, they took up 45% of all victims. And this is interesting because we still have this evidence, but we still don't see it as publicized in the media next to information that pertains to women and children only. So it's important to note here that conversation about human trafficking and as it pertains to women is, of course, extremely important, and it's something that we should be focusing on and should be working on. But all I'm trying to urge you today is to think of it to be more inclusive, to think about all the victims, so men, women, and children. And one group of people who is especially vulnerable to human trafficking are migrant workers. So these people are usually men, and they're kind of in chaotic situations. They're traveling, they're desperate, they're looking for jobs, which makes them very easy to approach if you're a trafficker. So they're usually promised false jobs where they'll be able to work, but once they find themselves in this other location where they don't know the language, not familiar with the settings, they have their identifications destroyed, the ID papers, and usually because they've been illegally kind of smuggled, they face deportation or law enforcement problems when they're trying to escape, and they're basically just working as slaves. And Meet Justice is actually the only anti-trafficking group that I've come across so far in my research that actually not only acknowledges that male victims exist, but also work on their cases. They provide an example of a man from Salvador who was actually trafficked into Texas, so this is like a really close to home problem, and he was forced to work on this farm at gunpoint. He was beaten and raped and tortured. And what's interesting about this is it shows us that sex abuse happens in labor trafficking, and I think that kind of blurs the lines between sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And I think one of the reasons that sex trafficking has gotten such a reaction from the general public is that sex abuse is especially heinous. And I think if more people know that sex abuse happens in labor trafficking, then we might understand it better and know how to tailor our resources to help these men. And also, despite the popular idea that labor trafficking is the only facet of trafficking that pertains to men, it's not. And it actually, young gay men are actually quite prone to human trafficking because due to this widespread negativity and rejection towards homosexuality right now, a lot of gay youth are at risk of becoming homeless because they're trying to escape like abusive family life, or they're simply kicked out. And there's actually a huge accepted fact that the homeless are especially vulnerable to trafficking, and these youth must engage in survival sex in return for housing or shelter. But gay youth aren't the only ones. So there actually are straight men who are sexually exploited. So according to Julian Heng, who manages a support program for men who have been caught up in prostitution, she explains that men or customers pay to rape men for the same reasons that women and children are raped for. So for control, for power, domination has nothing to do with sexual gratification or sexual orientation. And actually in 1994, a male brothel was discovered in London. And I was just shocked that I can't even imagine a brothel with men inside being sold for sex. And with the rise of human trafficking, at least according to many sources, we don't even know how many more there are. And in a report given by UNICEF in 2012, 2% of those exploited for sex were men. However, this number could be considerably smaller than in reality because of its underreported nature. So we have this stigma against male victims. We really normalize the female victim, so sexual abuse, being vulnerable and passive. We tend to think that females are going to be the one most likely to be victims of sexual violence, and that means that if a male has been raped, he doesn't want to say it because we don't create the space for male victims to come out and be accepted. And a lot of times men are they're stigmatized for that. They're feminized. And that's just the society that we live in right now. So to conclude briefly, I just really urge you guys to, in your efforts, really include men and research it and recognize that male victims of domestic violence, of human trafficking, of sexual abuse do exist, and they need more resources.
For human trafficking, everything that you do daily, like Google, Craigslist, this are websites that actually can influence trafficking because of its influence on our daily lives, and it makes things so much easier for the trafficker in itself. Law enforcement across the U.S. have identified online sex ads as the #1 platform for the buying and selling of sex with children and young women. Craigslist got in trouble in 2010 for sex trafficking. In fact, when the U.S. Craigslist adult service section was available, there were 10,000 to 16,000 adult service postings per day in the U.S. alone, and 40% of this total online sex ads in the U.S. each day at the time. And it was because of this that the adult service section of the Craigslist was taken off from protest of the human trafficking. There was an open letter from MC to Craigslist that I'm going to read to you. It starts off as, "I was forced into prostitution when I was 11 years old by a 28-year-old man. I am not an exception. The man who trafficked me sold me and so many girls my age. His house was called Daddy Daycare. All day, other girls and I sat with our laptops posting pictures and answering ads on Craigslist. He made $1,500 an hour selling my body, dragging me to Los Angeles, Houston, Little Rock, and in a truck to Las Vegas. I am now 17, and my childhood memories aren't of my family, going to middle school, or dancing at the prom. They are making my own arrangements on Craigslist to be sold for sex and answering as many ads as possible for fear of being beaten in ice water baths." So this actually helps the sex traffickers and other traffickers because they don't actually have to sell their merchandise. They can make the merchandise sell themselves on the internet through postings and through different profiles. And it's not just the Craigslist, but Backpage.com and Eros.com, and there are many other websites that have gotten in trouble for sex trafficking. And Google participates in this by allowing anyone to scan photos and profiles of potential sex slaves. They open up the ability to actually research into human trafficking, and while it's good to find sources that say that human trafficking is bad, by having this resources Google, people can actually find pages to buy people easier because of the research engine. There are also different rules to trafficking on the internet. First, traffickers have an easier time of actually finding people to be trafficked, mainly because of the social media. There was an upper middle class college-bound girl named Nina, and her plans derailed in her senior year of high school because her mother was sentenced to 2 years in prison. She was looking for attention online and found somebody who was basically her dream date. So while her friends went to college and started planning for future, she went and found this person she found on Facebook, and basically immediately at the start of their date, he put her on a street where other prostitutes were and said, "Catch a date." And she was just so vulnerable at the time, she actually didn't even think about leaving or running away. She did what he said because she needed attention. There are desperate people like this who just need attention all over social media that get taken advantage of by people on the internet looking for other sources. There was also different rules that apply. The other members of the panel have mentioned that there is coercion, fraud, and force. With the internet, there's coded language. So you don't actually know who you're talking to. A girl named Lisa, who was in the human trafficking, stated that basically if you find anybody on the website with the last name P, the P stands for pimp. That is a way to show that they are a pimp, and that is a way for them to actually hide who they really are on the internet. There's also very many postings, and you can post anything and anywhere. There's basically little regulation that there is on the internet because most of the regulation is done by the sponsors of the websites themselves. So it's really hard to be able to find out and go to the backgrounds of every ads that are put on your page and to basically do every single step it takes to actually find human trafficking that's going on your website, especially if it's a big website such as Google or eBay or Craigslist. It makes it harder for them to identify who is and who isn't a human trafficker because of so numerous postings. Not only that, but there is high volumes of sex trafficking ads. So even if they start taking off the ads, more and more will come. So it's just a basically avalanche situation. It's harder and harder to actually get the ads off because there's more coming in at the same time, and they have to actually derail their website altogether. But with all of the websites that have human trafficking, there are websites such as pillarsproject.com and interpol.int and newdonk.org that actually help stop human trafficking, and Oath website. They actually put out the fact that there is human trafficking here in ways and colors and informations in order to actually stop it. So the internet is a way for people to get sold, but it is also a way for them to have salvation. There is still hope. Thank you.